Okay, I have just a short video, hopefully, just to highlight the difference between the Cambrian and the Precambrian, as I was discussing in my previous discussion with Speed of Sound. So here, as I fix this here screen share, we have here a picture, and in this picture you can see the Precambrian, which is igneous rock, granite, and the Cambrian, which is the sandstone. Okay, now this is a video. I'm going to play part of it too, but in my discussion, I was discussing the Cambrian life that suddenly appears, in these layers. So that would be right here, and this layer here, and below this layer, there's nothing but granite, which is igneous rock, which no life, it has no history of life. So that's what I was trying to explain to Speed of Sound, that there is no history below this line right here, below the below the first appearance of life, and so this video here will explain a little bit, and this is called the Great Unconformity right here. In other words, this is the first flood layer from the global flood right here, which deposited the first life forms that were deposited, which of course were sea life, which were the bottommost, animals on the bottom, and everything else is on top. So let me play a little bit of this, and we'll see as they describe what's going on here.
Dimensional surface that we're looking at right here. So we have this very clear, solid, almost purple-looking foundation. It's a granite rock, and the granite rock is overlain by sandstone, quartz and feldspar sand grains inside of the tapete sandstone laid directly on that granite. Why does it appear to be such a stark line? I mean, it's clear. I think it's an erosional boundary of colossal scale. We're looking at something that shows the magnitude of flood flow over a surface. Granite was pulverized and converted to sand, and we see the rock above. That's the tapete sandstone. The boundary, the two-dimensional boundary between the granite rock below and the tapete sandstone above, is this surface we call the Great Unconformity. And is it just here? The Great Unconformity is continent-wide. It may be intercontinental. I've seen it, I believe, in the Middle East. It's over in Europe. It's in Africa, and here it is under the North American continent. We see the core of the continent, the granite core, and then we see the stratified layered rock on top. It shows evidence of milling, of mechanical erosion, of pulverization of the grains above. At the boundary? At the boundary. And so it's it is flowing water with a vengeance, a fury of flow over this surface, ripped and pulverized the surface and created the sandstone overlying it. So let me see if I can get the picture here. The granite that we're looking at was bigger than this, and the top portions are being crumbled and torn apart, but eventually at some point it's sheared off. It continually sheared off for some reason to this level, and then it stopped being pulverized, and then finally we're making a deposit on top. And the particles that form the layers above, where do they come from? They're milled from underneath or come from a distance, probably both. There's particles that are being pulverized as the water's going over the top of them, and then there's particles being swept in from distance. We can see the evidence of the current in the bedding layers, and it's a powerful current moving at several feet per second. You know, something like that to make these sand grains move. It's water power well displayed. Yeah. So when you told me you were going to show me where the power of water can really be seen, this is really it, isn't it? This is one of the big ones, isn't it? So we've got this layer. How thick is this layer? What goes up from here? We have...
It goes up a mile here, and it keeps on going up in the surrounding hills. Just a FYI.
Tapete sandstone, 350 feet thick here. And then above that, we have the first shale layer, the Bright Angel Shale, and above that, the Muav Formation. And that forms what's called the Sauk sequence. And the Sauk sequence is this package of strata here in the Grand Canyon that continues all the way across North America. I've seen it.
Okay. This is not a small layer, small mud flow. This is like a huge mud flow. And so you have, I mean, it wasn't sand washed from the Jersey Shore that washed across the continent. So notice he's going to go into the numbers, not the numbers of layers, but the numbers of sequences of layers. The first one being the Sauk sequence, and there's four more additional sequences on top of it.
In Nevada and Utah and Colorado. It goes underground in Nebraska. It's in Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania and New York. It goes across the continent. And this unconformity, the great unconformity, sits underneath that package of strata. It makes one really question the notion of a small local flood. We're talking about something enormous. Okay, it looks like a continent-wide or even global scale hydraulic catastrophe or cataclysm on our planet. I've heard the term mega sequence for these layers. Is that unique here? Well, we have the Sauk mega sequence here, if you will, 1,000 feet of sandstone, shale, limestone that goes continent-wide. There are 4 other big sequence packages of strata that sit above it. Those are also very continuous like this. I mean, you find them also around the world? Around the world and other continents, and that general style describes what the rock layers of the earth are like. They've been divided into big packages of different types with sandstone, shale, limestone, and that makes for this big picture of the continuity of the strata, which allows us to visualize what the flood was like.
Okay, so it's clear evidence of the flood. Of course, you can watch this video in its entirety on your own. It's evidence for the global flood, mega sequences. How enormous are they? It's Genesis History is the YouTube name. But I want to show another part here where it explains a little bit more, and it kind of wraps it up a little bit as to what the significance of these mega sequences are.
unconformity boundary here represents 500 million years. You mean between the granite we see and that first layer of the sedimentary rock? Yeah, they say that there may be 500 million years there. Okay, and that's what their explanation of Earth history would ask them to consider. Yet when you come here and look at this, I don't see the channeling or the uneven surface. I don't see a soil horizon. I don't see the...
Yeah, see, this is the problem with what I was talking about, the Cambrian. It suddenly appears, the Cambrian life suddenly appears in these layers above, and below there's nothing. There is no history. There is no sequence. It's igneous rock, and there is no life occurring. There is no history of life in these sediments below. And this is where Speed of Sound was trying to tell me that the ancestry of the Cambrian life occurred below in this layer here, which is only igneous rock. Which I was trying to explain to him, there is no history in that igneous rock. There is no phylogenetic tree in this lower sediment layer here because it's granite. It's igneous rock. It's sheared off by the power of the global flood. And, this is something we need to drill into their minds because apparently they've been so brainwashed that they believe that there's a phylogenetic tree in this granite layer. That's how brainwashed they are. And like they were talking about, they believe there's half a billion years between this granite layer and this Cambrian layer, which is absurd because there's nothing here. It's a sheared off plane. It's a sheared off surface from the global flood. It's called the Great Unconformity all around the world, everywhere around the world, with those 5 mega sequences on top, with examples of everything that was living on Earth at the time in those layers. So the timeline is just completely all distorted. And of course, there's not 500 million years between one layer and another. That's just totally absurd, especially when there's no erosion or anything between the layers.
The actual mineral residue from chemical weathering, I see the mechanical process. And so I feel confident that sedimentary process and the power of water can transform this surface in a rapid way. We don't need millions, hundreds of millions, even 500 million years here. And so time is not a magic wand that's the hero of the plot. Time is foreign to a good explanation here. And so we want to explain what we see. And that's what we see here. Well, Steve, the picture that we're painting here is that we're looking at a level that the conventional story says was exposed to the atmosphere and everything else for a long, long period of time. But most people, when we see the surface of the Earth, I mean, it is really rugged. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is carved out. There are peaks, there are valleys, there is crumbling rock. And what you're saying is that is not what we see here. It's nearly a featureless plain. It's not exactly a plain, but it's a gently rolling surface. Mm-hmm. And would that be the product of billions of years? Or would that be the product of the power of water planing off a surface? And it seems like that evidence alone would cause one to say, no, that this boundary happened quickly. Yes. The layer above and the shearing off. And we're looking at 3 things. We're looking at a package of granite, a 3-dimensional body. We're looking at the Tapete sandstone above, which is a 3-dimensional body of sand, particles which have been cemented. And then we're looking at the 2-dimensional surface the boundary between, which is really nothing. And we're thinking about how the two come together here. Yeah, it's just a plane. It's a plane. And so it brings our minds to grapple with this origins question almost immediately. Everybody who marvels at rocks in the earth must come here and must imagine the history that's here. And it's a compelling thing to come and look for history in rocks. And the power of water in rocks right here in the bottom of Grand Canyon is like nowhere else.
Okay, so there you have it. Evidence of the global flood without a doubt. No problem whatsoever. And just by way of repeating, there is no phylogenetic tree in the granite below the Great Unconformity. That's just total absurd nonsense. And the Cambrian is the sediment layers above that were deposited by the global flood. End of story.